Welcome, everyone. Happy Tuesday. My name is Boganora, and this is Imperial Ramblings, episode 03. Zalon's here. Hello, Zalon.
Hey, what's going on, Bo?
Hey. And tonight we got a very special guest, guys. We're joined by the Dungeon Delver, who is here to talk all things Dungeons and Dragons. Delver, how's it going? You want to introduce yourself to the folks, and we'll just go from there.
To the folks. Thank you very much. First of all, thanks for having me on, guys. It's great to be here. I've been watching your channel with a lot of interest. My name is Bill Silvey, the Dungeon Delver. That's me. I've been a D&D head pretty much since I was about 10 years old. I currently run a YouTube channel. The link's right up there on screen. You can check that out if you want to swing by and check it out. I have written some stuff. I've published some stuff. I have been fortunate enough to work with Gary Gygax. I got to know Gary, and I just D&D is my passion. It's the first thing that I like to do when it comes to nerdy hobbies. So, yeah, just feel free to ask me anything.
Okay, so for those of you that don't know, Delver and I kind of had a Venn diagram thing between his AD&D and my, and Zalon's Warhammer, and then Crimson Tide football was in there. So we kind of hooked up on a college football message board, and then all of a sudden, I'm attending class on Delver's channel every day from 11:30 to about 1 or 12:30, learning how to play old school first edition advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and it has been one of the most interesting things that I have done in a while. And Bill, if you want to throw the link up in chat to your playlist of how to play Advanced Dungeons and Dragons at some point?
Sure. Yeah, I will grab that real quick. I am old school in many things, including my IBM Model M keyboard. So rather than fill your listeners' ears with the dulcet tones of 50 caliber machine gun fire, I will quietly copy and paste that here shortly.
Cool. All right, Prometheo's here. I told you Prometheo would be here, Zalon.
I knew he would be.
All right, so Zalon also has a little bit of Dungeons and Dragons experience, and we'll let Zalon tell us, what his experience is, because I have very little actual experience playing the game. Okay. All I've ever done is sat in and played a character that somebody else made in a game, for a session, and then a little while later I did it again, but it was a different character, right? So, yeah. So hang on, let me get Mr. Pretheo here. Pretheo says you guys are rejecting 5e in favor of old school D&D. We're not rejecting it, Prometheo, but Delver's experience and Delver's expertise is in first edition. So
I am rejecting it.
Yeah, Delver might reject it, but I'm not, because I don't have any experience there. But Prometheo, if you do, then feel free to chime in.
Yes, enlighten us.
Well, best wishes, and I hope you feel better soon, Prometheo.
So Zalon, tell us about your D&D. Tell us about your D&D experiences.
All right, so my experiences have been it's about 5-6 years ago. I've had a few friends that all started showing interest. This is before pandemic, obviously, showing interest that they wanted to play D&D. Now, myself personally, I had never played any D&D in my own childhood. I had played other role-playing games, such as MERP, which is probably something that maybe Dungeon Delver knows what I'm talking about.
I know Middle-earth role-playing from Iron Crown Enterprises.
But the thing is, the crazy thing was, it was 90s version, so it was before the movies came out, which means none of my friends knew anything that I like. None of my friends knew anything about it. You know what I mean? It was something that my brother and I both got to read the books. My parents were, my dad was very cool, and it was, oh yeah, you're in fourth grade. You want to read The Hobbit? Here you go. So I definitely played MERP and Middle Earth role playing in the 90s, as well as Star Wars role playing. And again, that was well before even the special editions came out. So played a bunch of stuff well before it was super popular, but in role playing style. So as soon as I picked up, I always knew about D&D, but none of my friends actually played D&D growing up. But as soon as I had some friends decide to bust out and get I forget which version it was though, because it was probably like I said, it was like 4 or 5 years ago that I played consistently for 2 summers, every Saturday pretty much, and it was awesome. I had a crew of about 4 to 5 people, 2 different people that switched back and forth from being dungeon masters. One of them was a teacher that taught, I think, like middle school, but they were really used to, like, I guess, building a, something, building an activity, being a dungeon master. Like, they actually didn't just take because my one buddy was really good at being a dungeon master, but he took a lot of already pre-made scenarios and just ran with those. And my other buddy, like I said, was actually really good at putting a lesson plan together. So for being a teacher in school, he actually created from scratch a campaign for us to go through. Created all the characters and everything, backstory, and it was very well thought out. And he only did it a few times because it did take a bit to put it all together.
That's nice. That's nice. So, Bill, you've actually had a little bit of experience in creating campaigns. You want to expand on that a little bit so folks will know who we're talking to?
Sure. So, my main experience with creating campaign worlds, once I got a little bit older, I realized that I wanted a lot of the heavy lifting done for me. And so that's when, I mean, there's a lot of the things I did as an adolescent were never really much in the way of fleshed out campaign worlds. And through the 90s, I was mostly playing in other people's games, and that was the fallow years for me in D&D, because it seemed like everybody I knew wanted to play everything except D&D of any stripe. No 2E, no AD&D, certainly no basic or original. And so it was a lot of other different campaign worlds. MERP, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, hero systems set in Marvel or DC or their default Champions universe. Again, just about anything except. So in the late 90s, when I was able to set aside those things and really go back to my first love, AD&D, for the first time, and this surprises a lot of people, but that was for the first time that I really rolled up my sleeves and got into Greyhawk. And so a lot of people that heard your question and said, well, no, Bill, he wants you to talk about your campaign worlds. You might not understand. Greyhawk was the first published campaign world from TSR. Greyhawk, the world is literally just a thin framework for you to build on. Your Greyhawk may be as different from the next DM's Greyhawk, and theirs different from anyone else's. The list just goes on and on and on and on of things that you can do, because you are given just such a lightweight framework when you're working with Greyhawk. Later campaign worlds, because I think a lot of DMs just didn't want to do a lot of thinking, they clamored for deep lore and timelines and specific events and thousands and thousands of pages of work done for them, which is how we end up with Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms and and other campaign worlds where literally every leaf on every tree seems to be detailed for the dungeon master. So in taking the Greyhawk framework and moving forward, I was able to take all the little gems of ideas that I had when I was younger and liberally sprinkle those around a map that already had interesting populated places to detail out even further. So in creating my own Greyhawk campaign, I was able to take Gary's folio first and then later the box set and say, okay, there's a city of Greyhawk, there's the nation of Furiondi, there's the Hell Furnace Mountains. I've got a couple of paragraphs of detail on each. Everything in between is up to me to build. So it's kind of like Campaign World starter set. And that's where I put things. That Greyhawk is my grand blank canvas that I have to color on. But there's just enough there for me to add my own textures and shapes and designs. I don't feel compelled to say that, yes, there is a crashed spaceship in the Duchy of Jeff.
Okay, so let me interrupt you for a minute. I was super excited to find out that there's freaking spaceships in freaking Dungeons and Dragons.
There is a freaking spaceship in freaking Dungeons and Dragons, yes. But yeah, if I don't want there to be, there doesn't have to be. It's not like other more complex campaign worlds where if you just pull at this one thread, the whole thing falls apart. What do you mean dragons aren't like these supreme creatures who rule the world with an iron fist? Then all of Dragonlance falls apart. What do you mean Elminster's not an important person who doesn't do anything of note? Then all these specific events and all these modules just falls apart. You can't do that. Well, in World of Greyhawk, I can do whatever I want, you know.
Yeah, it's very awesome. So you actually, for the guys listening, we got Daniel's joined us. Bad Mother Trucker is joined us. Hey Jim, hey Daniel, Prometheus here. Some of our old crew. Delver, tell us, what's the title of the, because I'm still a little confused, and I know you're holding an autographed copy for me. So what's the title of the module that you wrote or had a hand in creating with Gary?
Okay, so the title is The Lost Crypt. I mean, that's the shortest, simplest answer. It's from Frog God Games. Let me just pull this up real quick for you here.
Okay. So Frog God Games, The Lost Crypt.
Frog God Games, The Lost Crypt. And there is a story there. There's a story.
So before you get into the story, Prometheus, this is the reason why I gravitated towards Delver's channel, because when it comes to discovering new things, I want to go as close to the source material as I can. And the fact that Delver worked with Gary Gygax, who created Dungeons and Dragons, I'm flabbergasted. I have no comments. So
I always thought that was a funny word, flabbergasted. Sounds like the death penalty you give to fat people. Off to the flabbergast chamber with you.
Yeah.
No. So The Lost Crypt came about like this. Once upon a time in the early 2000s, Gary wanted to publish his additions and modifications and basically publish a campaign world that was like that was like World of Greyhawk. World of Greyhawk is property of Wizards of the Coast. And no matter how neato they might have thought it was in the early 2000s, you know, that it's Gary's and everything, they weren't going to just hand it back to him. You know, I keep making the Led Zeppelin connection, but I will continue to make the Led Zeppelin connection. It's like Warner Electra Atlantic is not going to call up Robert Plant one day and say, "Hey, look, we're just going to give you all the rights to your music back." Yeah, no, you just take this back because you're a neat guy and everything. They're not going to do that. So likewise, Wizards of the Coast is not going to give Gary Gygax the World of Greyhawk back, and they did not. So he wanted to publish his own things and expand on some ideas that he had for the World of Greyhawk. But he realized that it would be a pretty formidable task with all the details he wanted to add and all the things he wanted to flesh out. So he reached out to a group of young writers and asked for volunteers. He said, look, I give you guys outlines, you give me completed sections of the map, sections of the game world. You have to basically color inside the lines, and it may not make beer money. It may make us all a handsome chunk of change. But if you'd like, send me a sample of your writing. I jumped at the chance. I mean, a lot of kids when they're 10, 12 years old, they wanted to play baseball with Johnny Bench or play football with Danny White of the Cowboys, or, be a race car driver or whatever. I wanted to write and publish things Dungeons and Dragons. And granted, Gary didn't have a license to Dungeons and Dragons anymore, but he was absolutely set on getting his work out there. So I jumped at the chance. I sent him just some little homebrew things that I had put together, and he liked what he saw well enough to bring me onto the crew. And myself, we started as 33, we whittled down to 11, but life gets in the way, and for something that's not immediately turning over a profit, it's a little hard to say, yeah, I'm going to work on this for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, right?
Yeah.
Writing
it's a little weird. It's a little weird, like we were having in the pre-show discussion about the copyrights on the music, that Gary created Dungeons and Dragons, but at some point he sold it off and he no longer owned the right to do Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, Lucas sold off Star Wars. He can bitch about the shape of Star Wars now, and nobody cares. I mean, nobody at Disney cares, I should say. So this is one of the things why I've gravitated towards, I guess, tabletop games, or I tend to call them analog games, because there may be digital components involved, but I'm not dependent on a company to keep a server online for me to play my game.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. There's tangible parts to the hobby. Like, you can play any type of video game is great, but there's not actually anything physical to be proud of.
Yeah, exactly. So now that I've, all right, so I've got my character, I got a little mini. I went and bought some minis. I bought a 3D printer. I'm going to print my own character mini at some point once I figure out how to use the darn thing. And I can just play, and I could play first edition if I want. I could play 5th edition. I could, if I wanted to, in case, maybe I hit my head, play 4th edition. I don't have to wait. So the fact that there's something tangible you can hold in your hand, like the Lost Crypt, even if it's just a PDF that I printed off, right? So I've got it up on the screen here. The Lost Crypt by Bill Silvey, and that is our guest this evening. So we're very honored. Bill, continue with what you were saying. I sorry I interrupted.
No, that's entirely okay. So
that's what we do.
So you'll get used to it.
Gary published, or Gary worked with us all, and we had to, it had to be up to snuff. It had to be what he wanted written. We couldn't just go hog wild and just say, oh yeah, I'm gonna have a 9,000 level dungeon with 1,000,000 orcs in one room, and a 20-headed red dragon with 200 hit points on another. We had to work within the outline of what he wanted done. Well, Gary came to me. Well, let me let me be 100% honest. Gary asked for a volunteer to work on an adventure module, not campaign world material, which is an adventure module in its way, but they're very different things. You know, hamburger and steak are both beef, but one is steak and one is hamburger. They're, you know, you wouldn't serve a hamburger and say, here's your steak. You wouldn't slap a T-bone on a bun and say, here's your burger. But, so he said, I have this module, and I ran it as a tournament module ages ago, you know, as a one-off adventure. I want to make a modern version. Who's up for it? And I said, I have 5 of your projects on my plate right now, not counting the 2 that you want me to do for another role-playing game that you've got coming up after we finish this. I'll do it, you know. So he said, look, if you think you can handle the work, I like what I see. You write well. Sure, let's do it. And so he sent me his notes for The Teeth of the Barkesh Nor. Now that's quite a mouthful, no pun intended. But for those of you who are fans of first edition AD&D, or if you're just a regular player of first edition AD&D, if you grab your Dungeon Master's Guide and flip to the back under the powerful magic items section, there is an artifact called the Teeth of the Delver Nar. The Teeth of the Barkesh Nor is what they were originally. So when Gary sent me scans, and I want to make that very clear, I never had a physical copy of Gary's notes. He sent me scans of his notes. These were pre-first edition AD&D notes that he had scanned and sent me copies of this adventure to work with. So the name got changed between his creation of this adventure and the artifact's final publication in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So I proceeded to start work on this module, and I worked very closely with Gary. And I got to a point where I said, look, you have a section here where there is literally just an open plain and a tribe of bugbears just kind of sitting there. Can I put a dungeon here? Can I put a little dungeon adventure of my own design right there? And he said, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I wrote I don't remember what the name was off the top of my head. It might be in the introduction. The story I'm telling right now is right there in the introduction. But so I put the temple, this Egyptian style tomb in the module, and Gary gave it a stamp of approval, said that's great. In fact, if you want to put some of the magical teeth in there, do that, that's fine. So we did that. We moved on. I finished the module in good order. I sent it to Gary. He said it looks good. The module wound up in the hands of the person whom Gary had originally asked to write the module. And this individual had demanded cash up front from Gary, which, I mean, you know, that's their own business decision. I'm not going to debate the wisdom of that or not, but it kind of left a bad taste in Gary's mouth. He withdrew his request and asked other people if they wanted to. I stepped up. I said yes. This individual then turned and told Gary, hey, I've looked over the manuscript. It's full of IP copyright violations of Wizards of the Coast IP. See, for those of you who may not know this, you can write and publish your own fantasy games using Wizards of the Coast rule systems. But there are certain things that belong to Wizards of the Coast that you can't use. Beholders belong to Wizards of the Coast. Rust monsters belong to Wizards of the Coast. Mind flayers belong to Wizards of the Coast, etc. They're their intellectual property. They are non-open elements. It's like you can use the source code that id Software released for Doom and make your own first-person shooter. You can even copy it so that it will run Doom on a platform other than a PC or even a PC. But what you can't do is distribute the music, graphics, and sound and map files for Doom. You can publish the engine, and if somebody already has those things, they can make the two together themselves. So that's basically what we had. Source code. We put our own stuff in it. Then we published it. Well, it never got to that stage because Gary bought what this guy was selling and came back to me and said, hey, I was told I can't really publish this, that this is not in good shape. And I was shocked. I couldn't believe that I had bungled somehow. So I said, well, let me look at it and let me fix it. And he said, well, no, I want you to work on, you have 7 projects in the pipeline for me. Work on those and we'll, we pick ourselves up and we move forward. But I was crushed. I was devastated. Came to find out sometime later that the individual who did this, and they're a prominent name in role-playing games, the old school community, had a habit of doing that, and them going to Gary and saying, yeah, I'll write Teeth of the Barkishnor for you, but you got to pay me, I don't know, like $20,000 or something up front, broke their friendship. And then they mended it by going back to Gary and saying, hey, this kid fucked up. So there I was left with the Teeth of the Barkishnor manuscript and no way to ever get it to anybody, right? I mean, you can imagine how small I must have felt at this point. So I sat on it and I stewed, and I've said in other forums, and I'm not going to launch into it right now, exactly who that was and exactly how I know how it went down. But one bright day, a couple of years ago, I said, wait a minute. That crypt, that Egyptian-style tomb, that's all mine. That's all mine. Gary didn't write a single note of that. And I went over to the guys at Frog God. I approached Matt Finch and I said, Matt, have I got a product for you? And I explained, just laid out the whole story like I just laid out for you guys. And I said, what do you say we excise the Lost Crypt from the Teeth of the Barkishnor? I write a little essay, a decidedly...
What year was this? What year was this one that went down? Because you said this was sometime later.
Okay, so I wrote Teeth of the Barkishnor off of Gary's notes in 2006.
Okay.
The Lost Crypt project started in late 2018, early 2019.
Oh, wow. So this is very new. Wow.
Yeah, Prometheo, the Lost Crypt is a 5e campaign, so you should get that.
Wow, yes. Prometheo, you're talking to the writer. Oh, wow.
That's right, buddy. So, and the guys at Necro, they work in 5e and they work in Osric, which is an open source reimplementation of AD&D, which you can publish classic AD&D products. You can't stick AD&D on the cover or Wizards will park their legal Death Star over your house. But so there's an Osric version and then there's a 5e version. Now I'll tell you an interesting side story about this. In that gap of time between getting shot down by I almost said his name.
Frodo Baggins, right?
Almost said his name. Yeah, Frodo Baggins. Yes, exactly. Frodo Baggins, that little
like
hobbit bastard.
Yeah.
Frank Burns. It was Frank Burns. Him and Margaret Houlihan. But between those two periods, I met Tracy Lesh. Now, I would never ask you this under any other circumstance, but I got it. Bo, can you please put up on the image store the picture of the mind flare that I stuck in the Discord real quick?
Mind flayers are always cool.
Yeah, stand by.
So the Mind Flayer, of course, even if you're like, you stumbled into this live stream for whatever reason and you only know a Mind Flayer from Stranger Things, the Mind Flayer design was created by an artist named Tracy Lesh. For Christmas in 2016 or 17, I got this massive art book called Dungeons and Dragons Art and Arcana. And the people who put this book together found that they went out and they tracked down every artist for classic Dungeons, for every edition of Dungeons and Dragons. But I will say the bulk of the book covers classic Dungeons and Dragons. There it is, the Mind Flayer. And the artist who created the Mind Flayer was Tracy Lesh. And I am very much a where are they now person. You know, I will go down rabbit holes on Wikipedia and social media and all sorts of things looking at where people are now. So when I see, you know, I didn't get original D&D books, the little digest-sized books, until in the early 2000s. I jumped straight in with AD&D when I was a kid in the 80s. Original D&D was passé at that point. TSR still had a few original collector's editions you could buy, but I was young and didn't have $20 to blow on something that looked like an antique already. So when I got into original D&D in the early 2000s, I said, you know, I would leaf through the books and I know who Dave Trampier is. I know who Errol Otis is. I know who David S. LaForce is. All the great artists of first edition AD&D. So the people who did the earlier pen and ink drawings, I was more interested and more fascinated by what their stories were, because a lot of them didn't move on as TSR moved on. A lot of those early artists did not continue to work for TSR. So I'm sitting there and I'm looking at Tracy Lesh. And I look on Facebook, and sure enough, there's a Tracy Lesh on Facebook. And I note immediately that he's Facebook friends with 2 or 3 people in the old school D&D gaming community. And I'm like, that's got to be the guy. So I sent him a friend request. He sets it back. I can look at his profile. What do you know? He lives like one town over from me. At the time, he lived in the city of Apopka, Florida. So I reach out to Tracy and say, hey, I love your artwork in early D&D. I have this favorite comic book store of mine called Gods and Monsters. It's down on International Drive in Orlando. By the way, if you're ever in Orlando, do give Gods and Monsters a look. They're fantastic.
I will do that, and I will swing by and pick you up before I go.
Good. Todd and Anna are marvelous people, and I love their shop. But I said, hey, would you meet me over at my favorite comic and gaming shop, Gods and Monsters? I would love to get your autograph on my copy of Art and Arcana. And he said, sure. Well, I met the guy. I met his wife, his wonderful wife, Shelby. And, you know, we all hit it off, and we're very good friends now. So when I started the Lost Crypt, when I went to Frog God and said, let's do the Lost Crypt, and they bit, I said, I got an art request. Can I request a specific artist to do art in the book? And they said, well, who did you have in mind? And I said, how about original D&D artist and creator of the Mind Flayer, Tracy Lesh?
Nice.
And they jumped. So Tracy did a beautiful piece. There's good art just all over the place in the book. Hector Rodriguez did the cover, and a beautiful, beautiful piece in the middle with some giant ants. Spoiler alert, there's giant ants in the module, but Hector did a great job. Everybody that worked on the module did a marvelous job, but it was so much fun getting the community, getting the classic gaming community, a module that almost didn't, well, Teeth of the Barkishnoor will probably never see the light of day, but a piece of a module, finally, something classic, something that Gary didn't write, but Gary blessed. He looked at and decided it was good enough to be in one of his own modules. And art by one of the original artists of OD&D, the guy who visually created the Mind Flayer. You know, Gary said they kind of look like this, and Tracy drew that pen and ink drawing, and he was like, "That's it, that's perfect." So when you see the Mind Flayer in any other edition of D&D, that picture that you've got up on Still Store there, Bo, that is where it all began. That is where the Mind.
So I'm sitting here looking at this picture, and I'm thinking that Futurama stole Zoe Burke from the Mind.
Yeah,
I have wondered about that for a long time. Matt Groening loved D&D, and of course, Gary voiced a couple of episodes himself. He appeared himself, and Bender's Game is, of course, where
that's one of my favorite episodes.
Exactly, it's one of the entire crew ends up inside a D&D game. Bender falls into the classic 70s satanic panic trap of thinking D&D is real, and so he plays for like 2 minutes.
So that's interesting. So Zalana and I were having a side quest conversation about possibly doing like watch-alongs for some Warhammer 40,000 stuff.
Yeah.
But I wonder if we could legally get away with doing a watch-along for that episode of Futurama. We could have Bill join us.
I would gladly if you guys
do it. You would do it like MST3K style, I think that would be fun.
Yeah, if you guys can legally squeak by with that, I'm there for it, man. I am there for it.
Real quick, I have, since we're bringing up Dungeons and Dragons in media, I wanted to bring up, I really enjoy the show Community, and in that show there was multiple D&D episodes as well, and that was very, very awesome. I've rewatched those episodes specifically, as well as the some of the other I don't know, there's a few other really, really good gems in that show. So
now I will tell you this, going forward, I am not a fan of Dan Harmon. He is not one of my favorite people when it comes to
you're not. Okay.
But I read the story of how he went to bat for the very first D&D episode called Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which, it's a play on a college course title,
of course,
which I thought was pretty clever,
Yeah.
When he went to NBC, and because they're gonna at least glance at scripts, they were like, so you're just going to have them playing Dungeons and Dragons for like 27 minutes. How is that going to work? Could it not be like in the background? Like, Abed and Troy are playing D&D, but there's normal stuff going on. And they fought him tooth and nail on almost every joke and everything. And he was like, look, this is my college life. This is my teenage life. And these are my memories. And it was fun and it was funny. And everybody my age, every Gen Xer is going to get this. And if you change this, you're going to ruin it. And I mean,
I think people underestimate the influence that D&D has had on popular culture, just as a whole. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is titanic. I mean, like I was saying earlier, we were offline. It's the skeletal framework that underlies the awesomeness in Stranger Things every season.
Yes, it is. And that little tidbit that you gave us, that little nugget of information about the very specific edition of the book that was shown in that episode of Stranger Things, and I'm like, I never would have caught that, and had I caught it, I wouldn't have had the knowledge to go research it to figure out what the crap are you talking about. So So evidently, the book that was shown in Stranger Things it was the Monster Manual, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
that particular edition, you have a copy of that. Is that correct?
that is correct. So here's the deal. If you're into Stranger Things or you've seen Stranger Things, but you're not, an obsesso freak like me about D&D, there's a scene where Dustin is explaining the Mind Flayer to Hopper and to the other adults, and he breaks out a monster manual, and I love Hopper's reaction to that. He's like, "This is a child's game," and Dustin's like, "No, it is a manual." But Dustin brings out a monster manual, and the monster manual he brings out, and I'm going to be completely honest. This is not like deep lore that I have known my whole life. This is stuff I got into in the early 2000s when I really started to understand that there is a degree of collectability. Yes, that's my copy there. There's a degree of collectability in classic Dungeons and Dragons that is it's quite a rush field. I have been told that my copy of that particular copy of the Monster Manual that I have, to the right person, would be worth hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And brother, don't ask me if that's if that's made me
I have some comic books that are worth I'm not going to say hundreds and hundreds, but several tens of dollars.
Yes.
Right.
So
but I don't have any Dungeons and Dragons stuff, but I tell you what I do have, which is kind of similar, but it's digital, is the original version of Zork by Infocom.
If you have the floppy in the box and everything, that is worth something.
Yeah, I do. I have the floppy in the box, and I have all the stuff that came with it. There was a time where Infocom did a subscription service, and you could sign up, and they would just send you like a new game every month.
Yes.
And I did that for about 6 months. So on my Commodore 64.
Absolutely. The best home computer ever made.
He was saying, "Roll Tide, roll Tide."
Roll Tide, yep. I'm like,
Tide.
Like pick up the lamp. Roll Tide,
Good gosh.
But so that monster manual that Dustin breaks out and shows the Mind Flayer to Hopper and is trying to explain how it takes over, it can use domination on its targets and so on. That is this copy of they show it very clearly when he puts it on the table, the cover. This is different from the Red Dragon, Unicorn, Centaur, Troll, Owlbear, Roper covered monster manual that 90% of people who know what that cover looks like are familiar with. The one that you could get at Toys R Us, the one that you would see in a friend's backpack and so on in the early
that's
to
the
mid
one that's
80s.
up now.
Almost. I think I sent you the more common one, but the one that most people associate that artwork with is. Yeah, there it is. That's it exactly. That is the one that most people think of when they think of that particular. Well, it's not really a triptych because it's more than 3. But anyway, that collection of monsters on the cover. The very first printing, what is called a true first printing, the one that I have, that one, is the one that Dustin brings out. And what makes that interesting is this particular print run was extremely short. It was less than a year because there are printing changes, there are some content corrections, there's even some different artwork inside of it. So what I was telling Bo and Zalon earlier.
Oh, really? It's different inside. That's cool.
It's subtle. It's subtle. But there's no way Dustin would have had a mint condition monster manual from 1977 just laying around as his daily driver. I'm sorry, I'm just not buying it. No offense. I think the guys, the Duffer Brothers, scene dressed that and said, "Oh, let's put a true first monster manual in there, like it really looked like."
Do you think that was one of their personal ones, or did they acquire that?
I think it very well could have been. As Zoan was talking about community, that box of D&D books that Pierce buys in the AD&D episode,
Yes.
that's not set dressing. Dan Harmon brought his box of AD&D books to the set and said, use this. And when Pierce is flipping through the box looking for the module that they're running in that episode, every book and every module that flips by, not only is it Dan Harmon's, but it's all first edition AD&D stuff. So, again, I'm not crazy about Dan Harmon, but Dan Harmon is definitely one of us. When the rubber meets the road, he is an old school first edition geek. So
that's very cool. So what's your take on do you remember back in, like, I guess it was the early 90s where there was the whole, don't let your kids play D&D.
Oh, no. That is mid 70s, my friend.
Was that mid 70s?
That started. Yeah, that
okay,
started.
The only reason I bring that up is because my wife said, when I told her, I said, "Hey, I'm going to have Bill on the show. You know, he wrote a Dungeons and Dragons module." She's like, and she starts raising her red flags, and I'm like, I don't know how much you put into what Tipper Gore has to say, but so give us your take on that, and what did you think about because you're coming from I realize it was later on, but at the time I wasn't paying attention to Dungeons and Dragons when all that was going on.
This nonsense all began. Every half generation needs a moral panic. EC Comics, Bernie Wrightson did some amazing stuff with EC Comics. And there were so many other great comic artists, but they were monster comics, they were horror comics, and a moral panic started. Like, oh, look at this trash our kids are reading. House of Mystery, creepy, eerie. No. That's
I read Cracked magazine and Mad magazine when I was little.
Yeah, me too.
Yep, same. But then it was rock and roll. Rock and roll has got to go.
Oh man!
All these different moral panics.
Not too long ago, I watched the video of when Dee Snider testified in front of Congress.
A great moment in pop culture history. Yes.
That was so awesome.
But yeah, so in 1970, D&D was released, and it was an obscure little war game by some obscure little company in southern Wisconsin. Nobody gave a fig about it. But in 1975 or 76, a young man named James Dallas Egbert intimated that he was going to engage in acts of fatal self-harm to his friends. I got to be very careful about certain words, right? We don't want to, we don't want to rock the boat, upset the apple cart for YouTube. But his friends knew that he played Dungeons and Dragons. They alerted authorities. They said, well, where do you do this Dragons and Dungeon thing? And they said, well, sometimes we play in the steam tunnels. So they went into the campus steam tunnels, didn't find him. He was so many ridiculous urban legends. They found him with his wrist cut. They found him with, as a fatal firearms wounds, self-inflicted. They found him, hanging. He wasn't there. He left campus to spend time with a adult friend. Part of his issues were that his parents flatly refused to accept that he was gay. He was extremely depressed. I mean, today, they'd probably give him a script for Zoloft and tell his parents to chill out, and he'd be as right as rain.
Yeah, but probably.
Back then it was like, well, we can give you lithium and maybe that'll make you not be gay, but
pray it away.
Yeah, exactly. So, the police went and they said, "Hey, your parents are worried about you," and he's like, "Yeah, but I'm 18. I'm an adult." And they went back to the parents and said, "Look, he's fine, but he's right. He's an adult." And he eventually went back to them, irrespective of anything Dungeons and Dragons related. He later did the big switch off to himself, which is a tragedy. It is a crying shame. Everyone fixated on the fact that he played Dungeons and Dragons and that his friends would occasionally LARP, that's live action role play, their games in the steam tunnels on the campus of the university. And it was all attributed to this mysterious game. People started buying D&D books, which at the time was still original D&D. AD&D hadn't come out yet.
Yeah. So was was as much as a tragedy as that was that a turning point in D&D history as far as popularity, or
that was
because
turning point.
Who was it that said that there's no such thing as bad publicity?
I've heard that attributed to a lot of folks. Gary had a similar quote when a young man, similar circumstances, Bink Pulling, took his own life. Avid D&D player. His mother and a since not only discredited but arrested for I don't even know if I can say the words for the things he was arrested for again without getting bagged by YouTube.
Yeah, probably not.
But and a discredited police officer all put their heads together and figured out that it wasn't bipolar disease. It wasn't the fact that his parents put impossible standards on him. It wasn't the fact that he didn't share the same spiritual beliefs as his parents. No, it had to have been Dungeons and Dragons that caused him to end himself. When that happened, AD&D was already in print. CBS latched onto this as the moral panic of the week and scurried up to Lake Geneva and interviewed Gary. At the interview, this is what Gary told me. They were, I can't remember who it was that was up there. If you poke around on YouTube, you can actually find the videos. Somebody will put them up, and then CBS will copyright strike them. So if we're in the cycle where they're up, just look up Gary Gygax 60 Minutes, and you can probably find it. But he said they spent about 10 minutes interviewing me sitting in my office and asked me some very blasé questions, shot some B-roll, and spent the rest of the day with they and him touring Lake Geneva, and Gary talking about all the awesome stuff in Lake Geneva, basically doing a Chamber of Commerce kind of job for Lake Geneva, and just having just a very pleasant meeting with them. They took their B-roll, edited it together, and made it seem like Gary was a monster. That he said, that he was, it's basically his fault. We didn't do anything wrong. But Gary said this because D&D's sales popularity took off because that kicked the satanic panic about D&D into hyperdrive. Churches were having D&D book burnings. Kids were buying D&D books to see if, people rushing out and buying Beatles and Led Zeppelin records to play them backwards, right? That they'll fiddle around with it, like, what is that? What is that? What is that? Okay, there's a mermaid with no shirt on. What is that? What is that? I don't know what this is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the best way to The best way to make something popular is to say you can't have it.
But what Gary told me was they can't burn the books unless they buy the books. You got to buy the books if you want to burn them.
Sounds like Gary was a smart man.
All of this moral panic caused D&D to fly off the shelves. As angry as he personally was about the interview, he said D&D was never as popular while he was at TSR as it was when that interview dropped. That they couldn't keep up with it. And even like sleepy little hobby shops, it wasn't just Kmart and Toys R Us and Circus World and so on. It was hobby shops. People were coming in and buying
which all those stores don't exist anymore, but hobby shops do. Gone.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Kmart's gone. JCPenney is effectively gone. Toys R Us is gone. Circus World is gone.
Hobby shops are not, and that's another great reason why hobbies are very popular, especially during the pandemic.
Well, one of the things that Salon and I enjoy doing is just going and visiting random hobby shops. I stopped at one in Tupelo, Mississippi, on my way back home last week, and I bought just some random thing that I had never seen on the shelf before. It was like a Astra. It was a guard. It was a Warhammer 40,000 guard heavy fire support team box, and it was a individual shop. So I got like a 20% discount. So. Which was nice. So it was still $30, but they had lots of D&D stuff there. They had lots of just everything there, and the hobby shops are lots of fun. And I would love to hook up with a hobby shop owner and maybe do like a spotlight type thing. That would be fun, I think.
A lot of the hobby shops have areas for you to actually play. Any type of tabletop game, and or sometimes a lot of them also do card games as well. So
yeah, there's a lot of card games, but there's I've seen some D&D specific stuff. Castle Greyhawk, basically.
Yeah, a lot of miniatures for D&D in a lot of stores.
Yep, excellent. So, sorry. So, Bill, continue with what you were saying.
Oh, no. I was just going to say that, the popularity of D&D skyrocketed precisely because of this moral panic where people were trying to, save our kids from Dungeons and Dragons. So, this goes back to the 70s. My parents sort of fell victim to that mindset too for a while, unfortunately. There was a no D&D stretch in the Silvey household for a while. But
hear those dice rolling, you're like, uh-oh.
Exactly. So, it was because I basically, by the 90s, I'm in my 20s, and I don't give a fuck what anybody says as far as what my hobbies are, right? So it kind of blows my mind because it seemed to me that as my taste changed, and, I did other things, other hobbies until I hit my early 20s and got back into tabletop gaming. But the whole thing just kind of blew over that, no, you can't summon demons out of the Dungeon Master's Guide. You can't, you can't cast disintegration by reading the player's handbook. And the succubus is not going to climb off the page and assault your son in his sleep, despite my fervent wishes. Anyway, but
I know she's trying to kill me, but can I romance the siren?
Yeah, it's a level drain. Really, is it that bad when you get right into it? But no, I just figured it had blown over. And then when I got into online communities in the late 90s, I was seeing the same stories being regenerated. That people who were born not in 1970 like me, but in 1980. So their first experiences with D&D was early 2nd edition in 91, 92. And then they start to play in elementary school and middle school. and their parents just pick the ball up and keep running, It's like the original blue-haired church ladies from the 60s and 70s and 80s. They moved on to Twisted Sister and rap music and so on, but there was a whole new crop waiting in the wings to say, save our kids from D&D. And Pat Pulling, the mother of poor Bink Pulling, she was still kicking around until the late 1990s. She was still making noise. She was still driving this, and I don't know if she was going on like the third tier daytime talk shows, if she was popping up on Sally Jesse or whatever, but
Maury,
her, Thomas Radicki, and that police officer whose name, they were the entirety. Like, when my parents kind of got blindsided by that nonsense, I thought that BADD bothered about Dungeons. I was like, oh man, this has got to be something, that they probably got like a headquarters well, yeah, they did. It was a little writing desk next to
and guys with walkie-talkies.
Yeah, exactly. It was a writing desk shoved into Pat Pulling's kitchen next to her Bell South trimline phone hanging on the wall. I mean, that was it. It was literally these three people. Well, Pat Pulling died, and I'm very sorry, and I'm sorry that she lost her son in such a horrible way. Thomas Radicki got put in forever jail for what he did, and the last I heard from that police officer they had back, he was like, his mindset was, you look on the bookshelf of any serial killer and you'll find a Dungeons and Dragons book. And I have to relate a funny story about D&D books and the occult and that sort of thing. A dear friend of mine is a D&D player also. And if you're out there listening, hi, Rusty. He and his wife went on a driving tour up in Maine. And they visited the town that Stephen King lives in, and where he gets like tons of his names and ideas from. But
I was
also
going to say, Maine is weird.
Maine is weird. Up in that neck of the woods, there lived these. The husband of the group is dead. I don't know if the wife is still alive, but they were self-professed psychic investigators, paranormal investigators. And they were hucksters. They were con artists. They're the people who helped keep the Amityville horror nonsense going for decades. The house is a gateway to hell, and all this shit. But they have an exhibition of possessed and cursed items, and I'm sure you can see where this is going. They go in and they pay their $5, and she's walking them around. The wife is like, now we ask that you don't touch anything here. It's not, none of the items are particularly valuable or fragile, but it's the power. We're concerned with the power. So Russ turns around, and sitting in a glass case is this later print monster manual. It's got a newer cover art done by Jeff Easley. Pretty neat cover too. But it's like a late first edition print of the monster manual. And he said he just it took everything to not just bust a gut and start laughing at that. He said, what I should have done was picked it up off the shelf and said, oh yeah, this is like a late 11th edition plus print with art by Jeff Easley. Yeah, they've corrected the Type 6 demon. He said, I should have done it, Bill. I should, and I wish he had. Just to watch this.
I've seen Alan on your streams a couple of times, and I can imagine.
Yeah. But so the whole moral panic, the satanic panic that cropped up with D&D was, it's as old as time. It's violent rap lyrics. Yeah. It's Doom. When Doom hit in 95.
Yes, I remember that.
I loved it.
Yeah, I still love classic Doom, And hey, there's another rainbow connection. The guys who created Doom were working on little shareware side-scrolling platformers for a shareware company in Texas. and they would do crunch. Like they'd come up with an idea for a video game, just a shoot 'em up Galaga-like video game for this shareware company on Monday, and spend Monday to Thursday barely sleeping, just eating pizza and coding, and then Thursday night they would take the master disc back to the software company, and then Saturday on their bulletin board, that's how long ago it was, they would start distributing out copies of the game and mailing out copies of floppies. Well, so notice I said Monday to Thursday. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, they would play AD&D all weekend long.
Yep, there you go. So you talk about Doom. You know, Doom was supposed to be a Warhammer 40,000 title, and Games Workshop just totally blew it. And they're like, "Fine, we're just
wait.
it totally."
Really? No, you're talking about StarCraft.
Yeah.
No. Doom as well.
I did not know this. I thought you were referring to StarCraft.
No, StarCraft definitely was supposed to be 40K, but Doom also originated as a 40K thing that Games Workshop just totally blew, and they're like, fine, we'll do it ourselves, and we'll just totally not take all the Space Marine stuff out of it. But yeah, dude was supposed to be a Space Marine.
That's interesting. I know that there's a book called Masters of Doom, which is about the history of id Software up until John Carmack and John Romero both left the company. One of the initial ideas that they had kicked around was Doom as Aliens, that it was going to be an Aliens game. Also, I'm not saying no, it was supposed to be Aliens, not Warhammer, but I mean, it certainly may have been. It certainly could have been both. Hello, Damien. I see Damien on my streams every day. How you doing?
Yep.
The plot.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say the plot of Doom came from the conclusion of their AD&D campaign. They had acquired a powerful magic tome. The party had. Carmack was running John Carmack was running the campaign, and a major demon was like, give me the tome and I'll give you the sword, the Daikatana that you guys have been questing for. And so they hemmed and hawed, and he said, come on, you're never going to get a chance to get the Daikatana again. And they're like, hey, really powerful sword versus old tome? Sure. So they traded it, and Carmack ended the campaign right there. He said as soon as the demon gets the book in his hands, he laughs maniacally, opens a portal to hell, and demons pour out all over the world and overrun the planet. You know, you've doomed the planet. And they thought it was awesome. They were like, oh, that kicks ass. It was awesome. So when they were looking for their own plot for this 3D first-person engine, which was not their first, because they had done Wolfenstein 3D.
Which I love. Loved Wolfenstein 3D as well.
Wolf 3D,
awesome.
Great game. When they, when they were looking for the next greatest thing with, stairs and varying heights and outdoor areas and non-orthogonal walls.
I loved Quake 2 though as well.
Yeah, Quake's a fantastic game. All the id games, I would say, up until Quake 2, just amazing games. But that. There's not enough Carmack there's not enough John Romero in Quake 2. You could tell that John's...
it was more about the multiplayer in Quake 2 that made everything all that much different for me.
Yeah. Carmack made homemade thermite to burn a lock off of a window of his high school to go take an Apple II computer, bring it home, and code on it.
Yeah.
With every intention of taking it back, I should point out.
Sure. I'm just borrowing it.
But if it's locked, then I'm going to burn open the window lock with homemade thermite.
The sad thing is homemade thermite is so easy to make.
Yes, it is, and we're not going to say how to do that.
No, we won't. Just
No.
you guys want to Google that? You're on your own.
That's right. You're
But
on your own.
so you said something earlier. I want to touch back on.
I said lots of things earlier. You can't
I know,
prove
but you were
anything.
talking about the Dungeons and Dragons bringing in the younger generations. And one of the things that I've experienced about tabletops games is my youngest son is 16, and he and I spend time just about every weekend building or painting miniatures because he's an engineering student, and now that I've got the 3D printer, he's all into it, right?
Oh, I can imagine, yeah.
Now we're designing miniatures and printing them and then painting them, and we're going to do something with them. Probably play Kill Team because that's what we do. But we might design and print our own miniatures and play, some Dungeons and Dragons if I ever get, good enough to be a DM. So is that something that you have experienced in your journeys with D&D? Are the younger generation people? I'm a little bit younger than you, but not too much. So like the 20 and 30-year-olds of today, is D&D popular with that group?
It is popular. It is popular with that group. And I'll tell you straight gospel truth. It is very easy to it is exceptionally easy to sit down and play classic D&D with a younger crowd. And I've said it, and I'll keep saying it. Once you explain to them that everything on the character sheet is extraneous to what they can do, and let them just play without worrying about, oh, I want to seduce the princess, but I don't have like a seduction skill. What do I do? Well, without being gross, tell me what you want to do. Tell me how you want to catch her eye. Oh, you want to convince the king not to send a peasant army up against the Red Dragon. What do you say to him?
I already can hear it now. Here's the scenario. Bo's gonna say, "Oh, it appears your mage has deciphered the scroll. It spells out ROLLTIDE. All you must do is read it aloud and scream it at the top of your lungs to enter the tomb." I'll be like, "Man, this game is totally messed up."
That would be an awesome scroll.
Oh, I know. I know.
You say that. I have the character sheet up for my character that I rolled up during your how to play D&D classroom, right? The day that we rolled characters, right? And I remember you allowed me to spend a command point to re-roll one of my dice.
Yeah, you got like a 3 or something.
I know, I did.
Like
It was ridiculous. So this is Steve, the half-elf ranger. Steve is from the Weirdwood Swamp, and he has his current residence in Castle Anthrax, but Castle Anthrax is governed by Edwardton the Ogre. So just take a look at this character sheet and let me know what you think about Steve, because this is what I got. And eventually, if I end up joining your Monday night game, this is who I'm joining with.
Okay, so Steve, let's see. I mean, Steve hits all the minimums for rangerdom there. At first blush, because I always have D&D books to hand, we can double check this. Strength, that's a good strength. And something, if you're into newer games, folks, and you've got this zoomed in, you're going to note that there's not skills here. There are some abilities, but there's not skills. There's not feats. have later been mutated into feats, but this is not how we roll in first edition AD&D. Is you tell me what you're going to do, and I'll let you know whether or not it's successful. And that's the breadth and depth of it. There are combat rolls, saving throws, and certain other die rolls. But we don't lean heavily on worrying about what's on the paper. We have a very heads-up gaming system. When I look out at the table, I don't want to be looking at the top of people's heads. And I certainly don't want a system like Pathfinder or 3.5 where people have got their face buried in a laptop, tablet, or phone looking up this minutia forever in a day trying to find out whether or not their character has the appeal to the lovely lady's dance skill at the right bonuses and so on. So this ranger, such as you see him here, that is it. That is what you need. That would fit on a 5x7 card. I'd say a 3x5 card, but AD&D has it such that there are certain adjustments and whatnot. But to look at the ranger, let's see. So you got to have a strength of not less than 13. Well, you got that. An intelligence of not less than 13. You're good to go there. A wisdom of not less than 14. And a 14 or greater constitution. So yeah, you're good to go. You've got a perfectly playable ranger there. But yeah, that is a class. There is no back of that. Like if you guys are like, oh, I wish he'd scroll down so I could see all the feats and stuff. Nope.
No, that's it.
That's it. A little bit of extra sauce for the ranger is that they start with 2d8 hit points instead of 1d10 like the fighter at first level. 1d8 thereafter. And they get their level as a damage bonus every time they attack giant kin creatures, which includes goblins, hobgoblins, ogres, titans, all types of giants, and so on and etc. So a 5th level ranger will get an extra 5 points of damage just because they're good at killing that kind of creature. That's it. Oh, and they have tracking abilities too. I'm sorry, I misspoke. They are very complex because they can track creatures. And all that fits into just a couple of inches of space in the player's handbook as to what rangers can do. The tracking is super simple. So rangers are one of the more complex character classes for classic AD&D. And when people play
if you remember when we first started that, I was looking at an assassin.
Yes.
And then in conversations with you, you're like, okay, really first time player, first character, probably just kind of want to go fighter. But, I had the stats to go ranger, which is a little bit, and Zalana likes rangers too.
Yeah.
From what I understand.
Yes.
Zalana, did you dig up your character sheets, or are they still in a box somewhere?
I don't have them. No, they're not in my possession, but I was definitely a ranger in the game that I was playing. So
I just wanted to throw that up there and show that to you. That's this right here is a result of what you taught me, Bill. In going through the player's handbook, which is something that would lead into what does it, so let's just say someone who has never played a tabletop game before in their life, they've been totally video games, which a lot of people are. What at a very minimum do they need to play Dungeons and Dragons? Let's just regardless of edition, what do they need?
Dice, pencil, and imagination, and tools that are appropriate for the version of D&D you want to play. Keep it simple. Regardless of what edition you're going to play, if you know it, if somebody says, "Hey, Zalon, I'm running a 5e campaign," don't worry about dragging a ton of books. Just get a player's handbook, get a set of dice. If your DM wants a big battle mat type thing with lots of miniatures and scatter terrain and so on and etc., get yourself a nice miniature you like. But really, it's dice, pencil, paper, a player's handbook, and imagination, and that's
so
it.
miniatures aren't even required. That's just
No.
like an additional
No.
thing that
They are. Yeah, I will tell you, a lot of what you see in the picture that you've got there, that is my some of my bits of Dwarven Forge lying under the rule books and so on. I'm not such a stickler for movement and ranges and etc. If you tell me, yeah, no, I'm standing over here next to this corner, but your miniatures base doesn't permit you to be exactly where you are, I'm not going to break out a laser point straight line across the board, and if my laser pointer is just touching you, but you told me you had cover, I'll go, haha, you're still getting hit anyway. All right, Dwarven Forge and miniatures are out there to look really cool.
and some of them do look really cool.
Yeah, the Dwarven Forge terrain is awesome, and I'm hoping to use it more soon in my Monday night game. What I do is I have, in fact, hang on a second. Let me see if I can just grab this real quick. I have a a camera boom and studio lights and stuff like that, and I can pump this out over Discord, and my players. Where is it? But my players will get to see basically like if they were sitting at the table.
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll say, "Hey, could you, okay, so I'm that guy. No, that guy to the left. Okay, yeah, that's me. Could you move my miniature over next to the funky table looking thing?" And I'll do that. But it's there just because it looks cool. Here's kind of a closer shot. This is from a game I ran a few years ago. I'll throw this over in the Discord. I'll throw it up in the Discord. So there's that, and then, oh, come on, where is it? I did a piece last summer. I have a business. I have a company. If you have an organization that is looking to do kind of a fun team building exercise, and you would like that exercise to be Dungeons and Dragons, where your team learns to work better or just wants to blow off some steam, my business is facilitating that. I will run a Dungeons and Dragons campaign for your corporate event. And my company, or one of my customers rather, here it is, I found it. One of my companies last year was Amazon. During the summer, they came over, and I ran one of my favorite modules for them, White Plume Mountain. And in White Plume Mountain, if I'm not sure if you got that one up there yet, Bo, or so yeah, the next one I sent you there, I built a piece of custom terrain. I built the Menagerie, the inverted Ziggurat, which is this upside down step pyramid.
That's awesome.
And you can kind of see bits, the table I've got it on and other parts of the dungeon, but that thing is enormous. On the map, it's okay, yeah, that's pretty big. And then I sat down and figured out that, okay, well, let's see, on the long side, it's 18 squares. Well, that's 36 2-inch squares.
Good Lord,
long.
the thing is 72 inches long.
No, it's 36 inches long.
Okay.
Because it's 18. Yeah, it's 18 squares, and if I went, with a 2-inch scale, so yeah, it's 18 inches long on its long side, and I think it's 20 inches long on its short side. And then I built the plexiglass because each section of the step pyramid is full of hostile creatures. It's like a zoo or a menagerie. And so each section of the pyramid, I built these walls of plexiglass, and that was not a lot of fun. I literally almost lost an eye doing that. That was pretty frightening. I felt
but crafting is part of the hobby, though, right?
It can be. So I spent like a week and change putting this together, and they loved it. They loved it. You can see in the right hand, that's my DSLR. I piped that into Discord, and I'm able to manually. I didn't have, say, the $1,000 for a camera with full remote web controls and auto zoom and stuff like that. But when they would say, "Oh, I want to see what that little thing down there in the corner looks like," I could just grab the head and turn and then zoom down. But even if I hadn't done that, even if I had done none of this, I still could have successfully run the adventure. You don't need all of this. When the pandemic hit, the reason I started live streaming was when the pandemic hit, I had a lot of friends out there who suddenly, like all of us, overnight became shut-ins. Say, what are you going to do today? Nothing. I'm going to sit in my house and hope that I don't catch Andromeda strain. And that sank a lot of game groups. I mean, a lot of people that I had said, yeah, hey, you ought to go get you a D&D group, were telling me, oh, yeah, I'm so excited. We're going to start in March. And,
Although, what about New Age Zoom D&D?
It's fine. I mean, that's what I was saying. That's what I was telling people is you don't need a 4K digital camera and studio lights and $3,000 worth of terrain and God knows how much in miniatures to keep playing D&D. And I insist that you keep playing D&D. And this is as true now as it was in March of 2020. You must stay in touch with your group, and all you need to do, a mobile phone is all you need to play remote D&D with, because Discord is available for mobile phones and you can play on Discord. Zoom is available for mobile phones. You can use Facebook Messenger to play, but don't let it be the hurdle. Keep your D&D games going, because morale overall with everybody, I don't care what walk of life you were in, was really low, and I was hurting for my friends who were hurting. Now, I had already played. My remote D&D game that I play on Monday nights has been going since 2014. And I have 14 players in it. And I know people that felt like the only way they could play D&D was if they were sitting in the same room. Well, that was out the window. Can we meet at the hobby shop? No. Can we meet at the mall food court? Absolutely not. Can we sit outside at a park? Well, that depends on what state you live in, or your just general feeling on, am I going to catch an incurable respiratory issue from somebody if I do that? The coof. So starting like March 18th of that year, I just started beating on the drum. You don't need a bunch of complicated, fancy crap to play D&D with your friends, and you need to keep playing D&D with your friends. Don't not game. Don't sit there in your house feeling like the world's going to end and that you're cut off and that you're trapped in a vault and there's nobody else in the world that you can communicate with. All you need is just a little tiny bit of internet connectivity, and your game can just keep going without a hiccup. And I said, if the person who was DMing the game isn't you, and they find the technical challenges too much to overcome, you run the game. If you don't want to run the game, get somebody else to run the game. If nobody in your group wants to play a virtual tabletop game and instead they want to sit around and be miserable themselves, then look for open games on Roll20 to play. Look for open games on...
That's true. So Prometheo made a comment earlier about storytelling.
Uh-huh.
And I've got it on screen right now. He said, for me, whether it's a DM or a player, D&D is all about storytelling. The system and the lore are a skeleton and an ambiance, but the real game is about writing your own adventure in real time. And that plays into what you were just saying. You don't even have to be in the same room. All you just need to be is you need some way to connect a group of people together to tell a story.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people make a mistake, and that's a very good point, Prometheo. A lot of people make a mistake that they have to have this Lord of the Rings sized backstory for their character, or else it's not going to be good. My character's not going to be any good. Well, why? Well, I haven't come up with a good story for him. Screw that. Just, you are Bob the Fighter. Here's your story.
Yeah, you're Steve the Ranger, and
you have some gold.
100% of his backstory has already been disclosed.
Exactly.
That's all I got.
Well, real quick, I just want to bring this up too, and I know of its existence just because of somebody else showing me a long time ago. It was probably, I would say, in the early 2000s. I was shown a bunch of online. It's online, but text-based only, no visualizations whatsoever of like role-playing games.
Yeah, it's called a MUD.
MUDs, yeah, MUDs.
Multi-user dungeons.
Yeah, it was interesting, and I was introduced to it and shown it by somebody who was visiting, and from England actually. And they're like, "Oh yeah, we play these," and I was like, "Whoa, this is very retro."
Yeah, we used to telnet into university down here, into UCF, and play on there.
Is this before or after they won the national championship?
Oh, this would have been before.
Okay.
They were waiting in the wings for a few years to win the national championship. No, we used to telnet into UCF. They had PDP systems, and I kind of cut my teeth on early MUDs back in the day.
Yeah.
Multi-user dungeons. And
see, I was shown those well after I've already experienced like Doom and Wolfenstein and a lot of other first-person shooters and or fantasy and adventure games. So I was like, well, this is cool and all, and I like to see what you've done with it, but I don't know if I can get into this right now.
There's an entry point where you kind of, you're like, well, that was fun. I mean, when I was a kid and I used to read computer magazines, I had a dinky little computer before my C64. I had a VIC-20, and it didn't have a lot of memory in it. It didn't have... It had better color graphics than early Apple II systems, but this was like the early mid-'80s. This was like 82, 83. So it was...
Yeah, for those of you that don't know, the VIC-20 was the predecessor to the Commodore 64.
Yes. But in 77, 78, a company called Surtech released a massive dungeon crawler for the Apple II called Wizardry. And
I think I played that.
Yeah, I remember that.
The wireframe graphics with a little splash of color sprites for the...
Wait a second. No, there was no color whatsoever. I had an Apple IIe in the basement. My dad kept it. We also had another computer that was all floppies, and that's where I played my first dungeon. Like, I forget what the game was called, though, but it was only in a small box you actually walked around the map, basically, and it was just, and there was, you actually went through dungeons and went to towns and everything.
Yeah. Wizardry finally came out for the Commodore 64, and I was so happy. But it wasn't until the early 80s that it came out, and I bought it for the C64, loved it, played the hell out of it. And then in the mid-late 90s, Origin, was it Origin? Interplay, somebody had gotten a publication license to do a massive re-release of Wizardry, all of the games up through Wizardry 7 on a single CD-ROM and a Bible thick manual that was all the play manuals, so you could play Wizardry, all the Wizardry games. And I was so excited, and I bought it and I brought it home and I played it for about 2 hours, and this was in 1998 when the Wizardry Collection came out, and I have literally not played it since. There's a level of primitive graphics that I'm like, this is a river I can't step in for the first time twice. I appreciate it for what it was. I think the Wizardry series was earth-shaking in CRPGs. I mean, the first Wizardry is Dungeons and Dragons. The character classes are almost virtually the same. They changed like cleric to bishop and assassin to ninja. And otherwise it's essentially just Dungeons and Dragons. But it is wireframe graphics with, like I said, if you run into a monster, you get a little splash of color on the screen, like 4 or 8 colors, depending on what kind of computer you had back in the day. But I can't go back to that. I can't.
Paul has a comment on screen about backstory. He says, backstory is not a dirty word. Your backstory should be a seed you can use to have an idea of where your character came from, and the GM can use to tie you to the world. Otherwise, you murder hobo.
Well,
I think Steve is the perfect name. A murder hobo.
Steve the Murder Hobo Ranger. Not to be confused with Steve the Hobo Murdering Ranger, but
exactly.
But I mean, I think that's a fair point, Paul. I'm not going to argue what works best at other people's tables. I'm just talking about old Bill Silvey here. If somebody brings me a really interesting backstory and they're like, I would really like this to make it into your game, sure, absolutely. If somebody brings me a note card and they're like, he's a male elf. Oh, okay. All right, cool. I can roll with the same 2 characters in the same campaign, and it doesn't rob me or anything of any amount of fun if somebody has a character with an extensive backstory. I just want the players to focus on the here and now, because to Bill Silvey, the backstory is, do you remember that time when we were playing against the Giants? It was G1 studying the Hill Giant Chief, and Bob put on his ring of invisibility and snuck into the room, and then John forgot he was in there and lit off fireball, and Bob said that killed my character, and we couldn't find his body because it had the ring of invisibility on it. So we spent hours picking through dead giant bodies trying to find a dead invisible body in the room. That to me is character backstories.
Yeah. What's his name? Kanye. Kanye the Giant.
I slapped that dick. I slapped that hobbit in his dick. I just feel like there's all kinds of character backstories, and I know what I prefer. So
what you're saying is you would not let me use my ring of anti-magic on the end of my flintlock pistol.
No, that's sorry. That's you're not. No, you're not doing that.
All right. Because I thought that was a pretty good trope. I thought it's like
it's a funny thing that people like.
So the one that I saw recently was like the railgun of peasant.
The peasant
throwing a spear. Yeah,
right. The peasant railgun. It's a line of 100 peasants, and you figure handing something to a character within 2 feet is a free action that takes no time.
Right.
So effectively, a group of peasants 100 feet long can accelerate a wooden stick to like a quarter of the speed of light by handing it from one person to the next, so that you've effectively created a railgun whereby they can fire. I mean, a wooden stick that's a foot long moving at a quarter of the speed of light will disintegrate half of a mountain when it impacts it. There will be a lot of...
These are the important questions that we need answered.
These are the important questions. What? Oh, what's another one I saw recently? Oh, it was the uh, portable whole bag of holding anti armor missile launcher, where basically
Okay.
it's an RPG shaped metal shell. Inside the aft end of it and facing forward is a crumpled up but open bag of holding. Rolled up into a tube in the warhead end of it is a portable hull. So you fire the thing with a ballista or scorpion or you know, arbalest, just however you propel it forward. When it impacts something, it pushes the portable hull into the bag of holding. Now, going by AD&D rules, and I guess this carried forward because I don't believe this was an AD&D player that thought this up. If you drop a portable hull, which is an extra dimensional space, into a bag of holding, which is also an extra dimensional space, it will cause a rip in reality, and it will consume everything in like a 10-foot radius around where the bag of holding and the portable hull used to be when you threw them into one another. So essentially, you know, it creates like a 10-foot blast radius that pulls everything in. So, you know, you can knock 10-foot holes in a castle wall or, you know, shoot a giant in the chest and take them down or whatever. But it's ridiculous. It's just
Yeah.
ridiculous things. And this is why, guys, I say the players are not allowed a copy of the Dungeon Master's Guide. We're saving you from yourselves. We are saving you from yourselves.
I mean, with just a loose rule set, you can really come up with some crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Truly.
So,
I think I did have a Commodore 64 because I had the very large floppy disks.
it was brown.
5 and a quarter.
It was a tan color and it had dark brown keys. And it was
Yes.
basically just looked like the keyboard, and then you had to have all the other stuff.
The screen was completely green.
Yeah.
No,
exactly.
C64 was full color.
Right, but you could, if you didn't have the color thing, you could do monochrome, because I had monochrome for a while.
Well, if you didn't have a color monitor, it could output in monochrome, but
Correct.
it itself natively did 16 colors. You didn't have to have add-on cards. I mean, that was one of the funniest things. Like, you know, we used to make fun of Apple users, you know, platform wars back when I was a kid, because it's like the early Apple II line, you couldn't do lowercase characters. You had to buy a lowercase character card to populate in your already expensive.
Which is Apple has carried that forward to today, right? It's like, you bought a phone and you want to make calls? No, you got to buy that app. You know. So.
Yeah, it hasn't gotten much better with Apple. There's the let's see.
Yeah, so I remember I had a Commodore 64. I upgraded it to a Commodore 128, and my uncle was a warrant officer in the Army National Guard, and he gave me an old helicopter flight helmet, and I wired that sucker into the audio output. Nice. I wired the speakers into the audio output and played whatever flying game I was playing, right? And it had you pull the you know, it had the tinted visor and you could slide it down, you know?
Nice.
You know, and I'm like 10 years old sitting there with this helicopter helmet on and a joystick flying, you know, and Dad walks by and taps me on the helmet. He's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm bombing Berlin." He's like, "Okay, continue." You know?
Yeah, many times, many Saturdays spent playing, flying over the rolling plains of central Germany, staving off the Soviets in gunship by micropros, or playing F-19 from them and bombing, bombing Russian bunkers to stop the Red Hordes. Good stuff, good times. The C64 was a fun computer. If it'd just been a skosh faster, if it had just if Commodore had vertical integration, they made the chips and the circuit boards and the keyboard. They basically, everything was built in house, which was why they were able to sell the thing at such a deep discount compared to an Apple II or an Atari or for a brief time the PC Junior, and B, because they basically didn't have to worry about any other investments at the time, they could keep selling them in emergent markets. So 1990, the Berlin Wall falls and the Iron Curtain falls, and you've got a generation of eager Eastern Europe Gen Xers who, like, if they're lucky, they might have a friend who had an Eastern European clone of a ZX Spectrum computer. Now,
or Tandy 1000 or whatever.
Exactly. Now, all of a sudden, Commodore can basically just flood Eastern Europe with C64s. It was huge in Poland after 1989. So well into the time when I had moved on to like the Amiga computer, and Apple 8-bitters had moved on to the Macintosh, and PC users were starting to rise. Like well into the mid 90s, the C64 was still going gangbusters in Poland.
Yep. All right. So we're rolling almost 2 hours, guys. Anything else you want to bring up before we wrap up this episode of Imperial Ramblings?
Other than this is what happens when nobody makes me shut up. So you have no one to blame but yourselves.
That's okay. We've enjoyed having you here, man. It's been great.
I've enjoyed being here. This is an awesome little channel. Thank you so much for having me on. Thank you everyone for listening and your great questions and comments. And it was good to see some folks from the from my live stream audience pop over too. You guys should subscribe to this channel. It is a fun channel.
So yeah, and everybody go to subscribe to the Dungeon Delvers channel, because once we get him above 1,000 subs, he's going to run a virtual gaming con for us, and I can't wait.
That's right. When I hit over 1,000 subs, not over like, 10,000 is over technically, but when I hit 1,000 subs, I am going to run a virtual tabletop con. We will interface through Discord. And yes, I will have some of that awesome looking Dwarven Forge out when I run D&D, but I'll be running not just D&D, but I'll be running, I almost said Stranger Things. I always want to say Stranger Things when I'm thinking of Tales from the Loop, because you can run a Stranger Things like adventure with Tales from the Loop.
Yeah, I would love for you to run some Warhammer RPG. I don't know if we have the stuff to do that, but we can probably dig it up.
I have Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay First Edition. I would roll some Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay if the demand was there, for sure.
I know Zalon and I would enjoy that.
Of course.
So what little bit I know about it is that the rule set is actually really good.
Yeah, if you can suss out Warhammer Fantasy Battles 1st through 5th edition, then you can figure out Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. They made it so that it would interface with their game, so you could sit down and play your Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay characters. You could literally set them on a tabletop on a battlefield and play Warhammer Fantasy Battles with them. And I could be mistaken, but I believe there are rules for awarding XP even for those. So if you go over to your friend's, your friend is playing just Warhammer Fantasy Battles, and it's kind of a semi-formal tournament, you could show up with your character from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and earn some XP, assuming that the game master of the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay game was cool with that. So I always thought that's pretty neat.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
So
we totally forgot to talk about what we're drinking tonight. Salon, what are you drinking?
Oh, my local pizza shop has been makes its own beer, actually. So of course, that's what I got right there. That's just original Dominic's IPA, 7%.
That's pretty cool. I've got a something new that I've tried. I have never had it before. It is it's called Love Honey. It's a Bock, and it's made. I'm in Little Rock this week, and it's made right here locally by Lost 40 Brewing, and it was quite good. It's not an IPA, and it was a little bit sweet, but it wasn't so sweet that it was offensive, if you know what I mean. And Delver, what were you having?
I was downing. Now I didn't get it. I think you have a picture of me having one, but I did not get a picture of me enjoying this tonight. But you, damn it, got me hooked on that Guinness. I mess up the order of this, and I blame the suds. But Guinness Nitro Cold Coffee Brew. Did I get that right?
It's yeah, pretty close. It's basically Guinness with iced coffee, just straight up black coffee added to Guinness.
You know what I may do with this weekend, depending on how I may do it before, during, or after, depending on how the Ole Miss game goes. Is I may do a little car bomb with that. How
There
good
you
would
go.
that be with some Irish cream in it?
Wow, that would be awesome.
I will report back, but that I have just been nursing one of those tonight and enjoying the hell out of it. It is very good. It's not the best coffee stout that I've had. That would probably go to Left Hand, which is a little smoother and a little creamier.
left hand is really good.
But you can't get it everywhere. You got to go. You got to go to the hoity-toity booze stores. To
Guinness is always my go-to when I can't, when they don't have anything that else that interests me. I'm like, oh, fine, give me a Guinness. And when I saw that with the coffee, and it had the little nitro ball in there, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is gonna be good.
Yeah, I mean, it pours up so well, and it tastes so good, so good. So I've been enjoying the hell out of that.
All right, guys. Well, that's I think that wraps up this episode of Imperial Ramblings. I want to thank the Dungeon Delver for joining us, guys. Link's been on the screen almost the whole time, so go subscribe to his channel. Zalon, when are you live streaming next?
Me personally, well, I always do a weekly live stream on Friday nights, unless otherwise specified.
Yeah.
Besides from that,
anything good coming out in Dawn of Titans this week?
I have no idea yet because we haven't seen anything. So it's just going to be there's been some leaks, but it's just going to be a reskilled Beowulf. So yeah.
Oh, okay. So, Delver, you wanna give your live stream schedule while we're here?
I am on Monday, Tuesday at 12:30. Wednesdays I usually do the evenings. I have a co-host, but he is down in Australia, so his Thursday morning and my Wednesday evenings are when we best are able to sync up our schedules. And then Thursday and Friday back on at 12:30. Sometimes, like, if I have a guest, like if one of you guys wanted to come on, but like you couldn't do it until like 5 o'clock Eastern, I will schedule it, but you'll always get a midday show, except on Wednesdays when it's a little after dinner. So 12:30, 12:30, 7:30, 12:30, 12:30.
Excellent. All right, guys, make sure you catch Delver when he's live. And that's going to wrap it up for this edition of Imperial Ramblings. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And hit that like and subscribe, because evidently that's how YouTube works. So, all right, guys, we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.